The house smelled of cinnamon rolls and coffee, the kind of fragrance that should have softened even the hardest morning mood. Balloons floated lazily near the ceiling, a pale pink banner stretched across the mantel that read, "Happy Mother's Day." I had ironed my best blouse one David used to say brought out the green in my eyes and tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. At 67, I didn't ask for much, just a little kindness, a little recognition that my place at this table mattered. Neighbors from across the street had stopped by with a bouquet of tulips. My granddaughter Lila handed me a hand-drawn card, the crayon colors spilling outside the lines. Caleb tugged at my sleeve, proud of the Lego figure he had wrapped in tissue paper. I thanked them both with kisses, my heart lifting for a moment. These were the gifts that felt real. Grant, my son, moved between kitchen and patio, distracted, his phone buzzing every few minutes with work messages. Kendra, perfectly dressed in a fitted floral dress, carried in a large gift bag and placed it with exaggerated care in front of me. Her smile was tight, rehearsed, the kind that never warmed her eyes. "Go ahead, Marjorie," she said, her voice pitched to draw everyone's attention. "I think you'll find this fitting." I reached into the bag, fingers brushing against bristles. For a split second, I thought perhaps it was a fancy straw broom for the garden, something useful. But when I lifted it free, I saw it for what it was, an old wooden broom. The paint chipped the handle, scarred with scratches. Kendra's laugh broke the silence. "Ready to fly, witch?" The room froze. A neighbor coughed and looked down at his plate. Grant let out a nervous chuckle, the sound of a man too tired to intervene. Lila's cheeks flushed crimson, and Caleb buried his face in his hands. For a moment, the shame was a physical thing crawling up my throat, threatening to choke me. My ears burned with it, my chest tight. I wanted to cry, to shout, to slam that broom against the table and demand respect. Instead, I pressed my fingers tighter around the handle and forced my voice steady. "Thank you, Kendra." I said each word deliberate. "It's exactly what I needed." Her smirk faltered just enough for me to notice. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Grant mumbled something about jokes going too far, but he didn't meet my eyes. I set the broom against the wall, bristles down as though it were a trophy instead of an insult. And then I poured myself another cup of coffee, my hands steady now, my heartbeat calming with each sip. The chatter in the room resumed, halting at first, then louder, as if everyone hoped noise could erase what they had witnessed. But I had already decided. That broom was not just a gag. It was a line drawn. The years of swallowed words, of overlooked slights, had ended with a crackle in the air as sharp as Kendra's laugh. I smiled faintly, not at her, but at the thought forming in my mind. If she believed a broom could make me small, she had no idea what power I still held. And later that night, when the guests were gone and the dishes stacked high in the sink, I would sit alone with that broom leaning in the corner and begin to consider exactly how I might use it, not for sweeping, but for something far more permanent. That evening, after the last of the paper plates had been tossed, and the broom leaned against the pantry door like an accusation, I sat at the kitchen table in the dim light. The house was too quiet now, stripped of chatter and false smiles, just the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I thought about what this house had meant when I first signed the papers. It wasn't supposed to feel like a battlefield. 5 years earlier, when David passed the walls of our small condo, felt unbearable. He had filled every corner, his books piled near the window, his scent still clinging to the armchair. I couldn't bear the emptiness, yet I refused to let my grief swallow me whole. Grant had just married Kendra, and they were expecting their first child. He told me they were drowning in debt from the wedding and struggling with rent. His voice had cracked over the phone. "Mom, we don't know how we're going to make it." I still remember the night I made my decision. I pulled the folder of life insurance papers out of the drawer, the one David and I had put off reading for months. The numbers blurred through my tears. Between the policy, our modest savings, and the sale of the condo, I could pull together just enough for a down payment on something better. Something big enough for all of us. A home where my grandchildren could run in the backyard, where family dinners would echo with laughter instead of silence. Grant hesitated when I first suggested it. "Mom, you don't need to give up everything for us," he said. But Kendra's face lit up at the idea of a house with more than 2 bedrooms and a kitchen island she could decorate with flowers. I told them it was the right thing to do. Family helps family. I insisted, convincing myself as much as them. Still, I wasn't foolish. David had always said to be practical, to think 2 steps ahead. When the attorney drew up the papers, I asked for a clause. The deed would be in Grant's name, yes, but there would be a promissory note of $250,000, an acknowledgement that this wasn't a gift tossed into the wind, but a loan, even if symbolic. Until it was repaid, I held a life estate in the property, a legal right to live here, until my last breath. The lawyer looked at me curiously, maybe wondering if I doubted my own son, but I only smiled. I told her it was a precaution, nothing more. Back then, I never imagined I'd need it. I believed in unity, in the idea that sacrifice for family was never wasted. I'd spent my whole life working extra shifts at the library, taking side jobs, proofreading essays for college kids, saving pennies in envelopes labeled groceries, utilities, Christmas. My hands had scrubbed and typed and lifted more than they should have, all so Grant could go to school without debt, so he could step into adulthood, with choices David and I never had. And yet, 2 years into living in this house, I had become a shadow in it. My photographs were tucked away in a drawer to make room for Kendra's decor. My voice at the dinner table was an interruption. My role as grandmother was treated like a liability instead of a blessing. I traced the edge of the promissory note with my finger that night, the paper smooth from where I had unfolded it too many times. The broom's wooden handle leaned nearby, rough and scarred. 2 objects. One meant to humiliate me, one meant to protect me, both waiting for me to decide how I would use them. And with the house quiet, I began to consider how silence could be broken, not with shouting, but with something stronger. The next morning, before the house stirred, I went to the bedroom closet where a small, fireproof safe sat tucked behind folded blankets. My hands didn't tremble as I turned the dial. I had opened it countless times before, but this time felt different. Inside lay the history of my choices, copies of David's death certificate, old bank statements, and the thin stack of documents that still gave me claim to this house. I lifted the envelope marked property and slid the papers free. The deed, the trust agreement, the promissory note signed by Grant's hand, his signature still bold, as if he hadn't hesitated. I remembered the day he signed it, his face red with embarrassment, assuring me he would repay even if it took a lifetime. Kendra had smiled through the whole appointment as if she'd already won something. The paper felt cool between my fingers, but the words burned hot. Life estate reserved. Amount due $250,000. Transfer of title contingent on repayment. It was all still there in black and white. No amount of laughter at a party or insults over brunch could erase ink on a page. I sat at the edge of my bed, spreading the documents across the quilt. It wasn't just legal language, it was the proof of every double shift I'd worked every night. David had gone without new boots, so we could put more money away every choice we'd made, so our son would have better. Later that day, after Grant had gone to work and Kendra busied herself with errands, I turned on the old desktop computer in the study. The county's property record site was slow, clunky, but familiar. I typed in the parcel number, then waited for the page to load. My name appeared right there under Life Estate Holder. Grant's name sat beside it as trustee, but not sole owner. My breath released in a slow, steady stream. Relief wasn't quite the word. It was more like confirmation, like checking a scar to be sure it still marked you, even after years of pretending it wasn't there. I printed the page and added it to the folder. By afternoon, I decided to visit someone who had known both me and David long enough to understand. Mr. Alvarez lived 2 streets over in a modest ranch-style home with azaleas lining the walkway. He had been a banker before retirement, and he still carried himself like someone who understood the weight of numbers more than the weight of words. "Marjorie," he said warmly when he opened the door, ushering me inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. We sat at his kitchen table, and I slid the documents across to him without a word. He put on his glasses, read silently for a few minutes, and then leaned back in his chair. "It's all valid. Stronger than most people think to set up with a promissory note and life estate. Your husband was smart, and you smarter for insisting." I folded my hands together. "Kendra thinks she can run me out of my own house. She thinks I'm powerless." Mr. Alvarez gave me a look that was neither pitying nor surprised, just steady. "Paper beats volume, Marjorie. Always has. They can shout, they can laugh, they can pretend you're nothing, but these papers, they'll outlast every word they throw at you." His certainty pressed into me like a steady hand at my back. I gathered the papers once more, tucking them back into their folder. When I left his house, the sky had turned a dull gray, the kind that promised rain, but held it just out of reach. Walking home, I felt the folder under my arm as solid as stone. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't trembling. I was simply carrying proof of who I was and what could no longer be taken from me. And that evening, when I set the folder back inside my safe, I knew it was time to decide how I would use it. The folder didn't leave my side for the next 2 days. It sat on the counter while I brewed coffee on the nightstand while I slept. I had proof, yes, but proof without action was nothing more than paper gathering dust. What I needed now was someone to help me wield it. On Monday morning, I made an appointment with an attorney whose name I'd been given years ago at a community seminar about estate planning. Kavita Patel, mid-40s, sharp as a blade, and known for not wasting a client's time. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a nondescript building downtown, walls lined with neatly framed degrees and certificates. The receptionist offered me tea while I waited, but my nerves already buzzed too much to drink it. When Ms. Patel stepped out, she extended her hand with brisk confidence, then ushered me into her office. "What brings you in, Mrs. Ellison?" she asked, settling behind her desk. I placed the folder in front of her. "I bought my son and his wife a house. The deed is tied to a trust, and I retained a life estate. There's also a promissory note for $250,000. They haven't paid a dime. And now," my throat tightened. Remembering Kendra's laughter, the broom pressed into my hands. "Now, they treat me like a burden they're waiting to unload." Patel adjusted her glasses and began reading. She moved quickly, scanning each page, her pen tapping against the desk with a steady rhythm. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is stronger than most arrangements I see," she said. "The promissory note is valid, enforceable, and tied to the property. The life estate means you cannot be removed from the home without your consent. In plain terms, you hold the cards." I swallowed. "So what are my options?" She ticked them off one by one with practiced precision. "First, repayment. You can demand they honor the note. If they find the money, they'll have to pay you back or refinance the property. Second, eviction. Because they are effectively tenants under your life estate, you could move to reclaim full control. Third, sale. With your rights, you could force the property onto the market, though that tends to be a last resort." Her words were matter of fact, but to me, they landed like stones in water, rippling outward. Each option meant a break in the fragile facade of family. Each meant that the Sunday brunches and polite smiles would shatter, replaced by lawyers and deadlines. Patel must have seen the hesitation in my face. She folded her hands on the desk. "You came here because you've had enough. I've seen this before, Mrs. Ellison. People assume kindness means weakness. They forget that law is made for people like you, people who gave too much and are being trampled in return." I exhaled slowly. "If I push this, I'll be pushing my own son out of his home." She didn't flinch. "No. You'll be reminding him it was never solely his to begin with. You gave him a gift, and he let someone turn it into a weapon against you. If he cannot respect the terms, then the terms speak for you." Her certainty steadied me more than any cup of tea could. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper onto her desk. "The first step is a demand letter. We'll give them 21 days to respond, repay the note in full, or vacate the property. It's professional, clear, and fair. If they comply, no further action is needed. If not, we proceed." I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do it." Patel began typing the keys, clicking briskly each stroke, like a nail driven into the coffin of my hesitation. She printed the letter, read it aloud, and slid it across for me to sign. My hand hovered over the pen for a moment, but then I remembered the broom leaning in the pantry, the look on my granddaughter's face, and I pressed the ink firmly onto the page. When I left her office, the folder felt lighter under my arm, though the weight of what I'd set in motion pressed on my chest. In 21 days, everything would change. The letter sat tucked inside my cardigan pocket as I moved through the kitchen that morning. The smell of toast and fried eggs drifted through the air, ordinary scents that didn't match the heaviness in my chest. I set plates on the table with deliberate care, arranging utensils, pouring juice into glasses. The motions steadied me, gave me something to cling to while I waited for the moment I knew was coming. Grant came in first tie, askew, already distracted by the buzzing phone in his hand. He muttered a quick morning and reached for the coffee pot. Kendra followed, heels clicking against the tile, her perfume arriving before she did. She was already scrolling on her tablet, barely glancing at me as she slid into her chair. I sat down opposite them, folded my hands, and spoke in a voice calm enough to quiet the clatter of forks against plates. "Before we start the day, I need to make something clear. There are new rules in this house." Kendra's eyes lifted sharp with amusement. "Rules?" she echoed, her lips curling. "What are we, children?" Grant sighed, already pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mom, can we not?" I cut him off gently. "Respect. Chores. No insults. Everyone contributes to the home and everyone deserves dignity under its roof. That includes me." Kendra let out a laugh, low and mocking. "Dignity? Please. If you're going to start giving lectures, maybe you should find your own place and see how much dignity you can afford." Grant shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He buttered his toast with careful attention, as if the motion itself might erase the tension building in the room. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the envelope, and placed it neatly in the center of the table. "Then you should both read this." Kendra raised a brow, smirking as she tore it open. Her smirk faltered the moment her eyes scanned the words. Grant leaned closer, confusion darkening into something else, fear, maybe, or disbelief. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. "A demand," I said evenly. "The promissory note you signed, Grant. 250,000. You have 21 days to repay it or vacate this house. It's all legal and it's all enforceable. I've spoken with an attorney." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Kendra finally snapped the paper down on the table. "You're joking." "I don't joke about respect," I replied. Grant's face had drained of color. He looked at me, then at Kendra, then back at me. "Mom, this isn't necessary." "It is," I said, steady as stone, "because for too long, You've both mistaken my silence for weakness. I gave you this home, but I never gave away my rights. 21 days, Grant. That's the deadline. Kendra opened her mouth, no doubt ready to spit another insult, but something in my tone must have stopped her. She closed it again, eyes flashing with anger, but she stayed silent. I rose from the table, gathered my empty plate, and carried it to the sink. My movements were quiet, almost ordinary, but inside, I felt the click of a clock beginning to tick. Every second from that morning forward belonged to the countdown. The envelope still lay on the table, stark white against the dark wood, its presence louder than any argument we could have had. And as I rinsed my plate under the tap, I knew the next 21 days would reveal exactly what kind of family I had raised and what kind of strength I still carried. The house felt heavier after the envelope landed on that table, as if every wall had absorbed the weight of what was written inside. I knew Kendra would spend her days plotting and whispering, and Grant would sink further into silence. So I began to prepare not for battle, but for departure. On Thursday afternoon, I signed a lease for a small one-bedroom apartment near the park. The building was nothing fancy, a modest brick structure with peeling paint, but the windows faced east, and morning light spilled over the hardwood floors. The landlord, a kind woman with a voice like gravel, handed me the keys after I wrote the first month's rent check from my pension account. I slipped the keys into my purse and closed my hand around them as if they were proof of my own survival. I didn't make a scene or pack in broad daylight. Instead, I moved my belongings little by little, a bag here, a box there. My late husband's books went first, each one wrapped in brown paper, carried down the driveway when no one was watching. A quilt my mother had made followed, folded tight and hidden beneath my coat as I loaded it into the car. The act of taking things slowly felt almost ceremonial, like gathering pieces of myself I had scattered over the years. At the apartment, I bought the basics, a new dishes from a thrift store, a second-hand table sturdy enough to bear weight linens in shades of blue that reminded me of the sea David and I had once dreamed of retiring near. Every purchase, no matter how small, was mine alone, paid for with the pension I had earned, cataloging books and stamping due dates long after my body had begged for rest. It wasn't luxury, but it was freedom. Still, there were moments when my resolve wavered. Lila caught me one evening as I tucked a photo album under my arm. She had come into the hallway quietly, her 12-year-old eyes too observant, too sharp for her age. "Grandma?" she whispered, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Are you leaving us?" Her hug was warm, desperate, and for a heartbeat, I nearly broke. My throat tightened, and I thought of abandoning the plan of letting the letter go unanswered, of slipping back into silence just so I wouldn't have to see tears in her eyes. I stroked her hair and forced a smile. "I'm not leaving you, sweetheart. I'm making sure we all have the kind of home we deserve." She pressed her cheek against me, nodding, as if she understood more than she should. When she let go, I kissed her forehead and carried the album out to the car, each step heavier than the last. That night alone in my new apartment, I placed the album on the shelf and sat at the bare table. My hands rested on the wood, tracing its rough surface. For the first time in years, no one interrupted me. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke. No one shut a door in my face. The silence was sharp, but it was mine. "Sometimes leaving is the only way to return," I murmured to the empty room. I wasn't running away. I was building a place from which I could stand stronger. Back at the house, the days ticked down toward the deadline. The broom still leaned in the pantry, the envelope still weighed on the table, and tension thickened like storm clouds before a break. The first sign came through my neighbor Elaine, who slid an envelope through my mailbox one morning with a note clipped to it. Thought you should see this. Inside were printed screenshots from a community Facebook group. There, in bold type and under Kendra's smiling profile picture, were words designed to sting. Funny how some witches get brooms for Mother's Day and can't take a joke one post read. Another had a blurry photo of me walking to my car, captioned, "Careful neighbors, she might hex your roses next." Laughter emojis trailed beneath, and a few neighbors I thought friendly had added their own remarks, polite but sharp, the kind that slice deeper, because they wear masks of humor. My face flushed as I read. For a moment I felt 13 again, standing at my locker, while mean girls whispered behind their hands. Age doesn't make you immune to humiliation. It only makes you recognize its flavor faster. I placed the papers on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea. The cup rattled against the saucer, not from anger, but from the tremor of being seen as ridiculous in the very community I had once felt safe. This house, this neighborhood, had been the center of my life since David and I first dreamed of family barbecues and book club meetings. And now, thanks to a careless gift and a malicious tongue, I had been recast as a caricature. I didn't reply online. I didn't storm over to Kendra, demanding she stop. Instead, I scanned every page Elaine had printed and emailed them to Ms. Patel. Within an hour, she called. "Marjorie, this is harassment. Clear, public, and documented. If they try to argue this was all a misunderstanding, these screenshots prove otherwise. Silence is your ally here. Let me handle the noise." Her calm steadied me. "Paper beats volume," Mr. Alvarez had said, and here it was. Again, proof piling quietly, while Kendra dug her own hole with every keystroke. Still, the whispers seeped into daily life. At the grocery store, I caught a pair of women from church glance my way and smother laughter. At the pharmacy, the clerk hesitated before asking if I wanted my receipt, as though proximity might invite trouble. The sting wasn't just the words themselves, but how quickly neighbors leaned into the spectacle. I carried myself straighter, though, each time I walked out the door. If they wanted a witch, I would give them a woman who moved with such composure that gossip lost its spark. At night, I sat in my apartment with the blinds open to the park, reading by lamplight. The quiet was a balm, though sometimes I missed the sound of Lila's chatter or the smell of Grant's coffee in the morning. Yet every time I thought of bending, of letting the humiliation wash me back into silence, I saw the Broom again. The sneer. The way Kendra's words had cut through the room like broken glass. That memory was enough to keep me still steady waiting. Patel sent a formal update. A week later, the demand letter had been received, and she had added a harassment clause backed by the screenshots. 21 days was now 19. I placed the phone down and looked at the Broom leaning in the corner of my apartment. I hadn't thrown it away. Instead, I let it stand there as a reminder what was meant as ridicule could become a marker of resilience. The clock ticked louder each night, not from fear, but from anticipation. It was a Tuesday evening when Lila knocked softly at the door of my little apartment. Grant had driven her over after soccer practice, saying something about how she wanted to work on homework in a quieter place. I could see in his eyes he was grateful for the respite. He kissed her hair, squeezed my shoulder, and left before I could offer tea. Lila settled at the kitchen table, books spilling out of her backpack. But instead of opening them, she folded her arms and looked at me with that stubborn, unblinking gaze only 12-year-olds can manage. "Grandma," she said finally, "why does Mom always make fun of you? At the party with the Broom and online too." My friends showed me the posts. Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with shame. She wasn't asking like a curious child. She was asking like someone caught between two worlds trying to decide which one to trust. I set aside the dish towel in my hands and sat across from her. I didn't rush my words. "Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups forget that respect is the rent we pay for living together. Your mom thinks jokes are easier than kindness, but jokes that cut leave scars." Lila's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She looked down at her math book and traced the edges of the pages with her finger. I don't like it when she does that. I don't like how people laugh. It makes me feel like I should laugh too. But it hurts here. She tapped her chest. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You don't have to join in just because others do. You can choose better. That's the kind of strength that makes a person good, not just polite. She nodded slowly, as if storing away my words for later. We sat quietly for a while, the only sound the scratch of her pencil as she finally bent over her homework. When Grant returned to pick her up, Caleb trailed in with him carrying a plastic bag of baseball cleats. Grant was distracted, answering a work call, and barely noticed when Caleb slipped into the kitchen. The boy hovered near the doorway, shy as always. "Hi, Grandma," he whispered. I crouched to his height and brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Hi, darling. Did you have practice too?" He nodded. Then, after glancing toward the hall, to be sure his father wasn't listening, he leaned close and said, "I don't think you're a witch. I think you're nice, and I'm always going to respect you no matter what Mom says." The earnestness in his brown eyes nearly undid me. I pulled him into my arms, careful not to hold too tight. His small body was warm, trembling a little, as if confessing such loyalty cost him something. "Thank you, Caleb," I whispered into his hair. "That means more than you'll ever know. Children should never have to pick sides between the people they love." Yet here they were learning that cruelty could be inherited, like furniture passed down, unless someone broke the chain. I prayed that my steadiness might give them another pattern to follow. Grant ended his call and stepped back into the room, weary lines deepening around his mouth. He didn't ask what we'd been talking about. Perhaps he didn't want to know. He only gathered their bags, kissed me on the cheek, and ushered them out the door. As I watched them go, the silence that followed felt heavier than usual, not because I was alone, but because I carried their unspoken questions with me. Grant came to see me one evening after work. His shoulders slumped in a way that reminded me of when he was a teenager, caught sneaking in past curfew. He sat at my kitchen table, rubbing his palms against his jeans, as if the words he carried might slip away if he didn't hold them tightly. "I've tried 3 banks, Mom," he said. Finally, his voice low. "Not one will touch us. Between the credit cards, the kitchen remodel, and the Cancun trip last year, we don't look good on paper." I stirred my tea slowly, letting his words sink in. "And the 2 cars in the driveway." He grimaced. "One's not even paid off yet." I said nothing. He filled the silence with nervous energy, explaining the same thing in 3 different ways. The debt stacked too high, the lenders unimpressed, the numbers refusing to stretch into something respectable. At last, he leaned back, exhausted. "We don't have the $250,000. We don't even have 25. I had expected this. Patel had too. The demand was never about expecting prompt payment. It was about setting boundaries that could no longer be ignored. "What does Kendra say?" I asked carefully. His jaw tightened. "She says you should drop it. She says you're choosing paperwork over family. She says..." He hesitated, and I knew he was weighing whether to protect me from the sharpest edge of her tongue. "Go on," I urged. "She says you've never really accepted her, and now you're using money to get rid of her. She thinks this is personal." I took a slow sip of tea, steadying myself. Respect is always personal, Grant. But the money, that's just math. Math doesn't care about feelings. He flinched because he knew it was true. Numbers don't bend to affection, and banks don't loan on pity. A week later, Patel called. "It's time, Marjorie. I'll file the notice of default first thing tomorrow." The following afternoon, the official papers were taped to the front door of the house I had once believed would hold my family together. Thick white sheets printed with bold type. A notice to cure the debt or surrender the property. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed to read. One took out her phone, no doubt snapping a picture for the gossip mill. The shame was no longer whispered behind curtains or posted in Facebook groups. It was nailed to the very wood of the door for anyone to see. Later, Grant told me Kendra had torn the notice down in a fit of fury, shredding it into strips and throwing them across the yard. But paper multiplies. Patel filed another copy with the county, and another arrived by certified mail. Grant stopped answering my calls for a few days after that. When he finally picked up, his voice sounded scraped raw. "Mom, I don't know what to do. I can't fight numbers. I can't make money appear. And Kendra won't stop telling me it's all your fault." I closed my eyes, listening not just to his words, but to the boy underneath the one who had once leaned on me when he couldn't figure out his homework, the one who trusted me to make the world make sense. "You don't have to fight numbers, Grant," I said softly. "You only have to decide if respect is worth more than debt." The silence on the line was long broken, only by his shaky breath. The next morning, Patel emailed me confirmation the notice was recorded and enforceable. The clock was officially ticking. I called for a house meeting on a Thursday evening. Grant looked weary, but he agreed. Kendra came down the stairs with her arms folded, lips pursed, already daring me to try. I had written everything down on a single sheet of paper, no longer than a grocery list. Rules clear and simple. Respect in words. Respect in space, and no more insults. Chores were to be shared. Privacy honored. I read them aloud, my voice steady. When I finished, I set the paper on the coffee table. "These are not suggestions," I said. "They are the terms of living here while the matter is decided." Kendra let out a sharp laugh, the kind meant to slice through dignity. "What is this Marjorie A. boarding house? You want us to sign your little list, like school children?" Grant's hand went to his forehead. "Kendra, please," he murmured. "Just don't." But she was wound tight. "No, Grant, this is ridiculous. She's trying to control us with scraps of paper. First the demand letter, now house rules. What's next? Bedtime?" I didn't reply. The air was already heavy enough. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited. The sound of tires crunching on gravel drew our attention. Through the window, two men in dark suits approached the front steps. A knock followed, firm and official. Grant rose, uncertain, and opened the door. One of the men spoke calmly, handed him an envelope, then affixed another notice squarely to the door with blue tape before walking away. No drama, just business. Kendra rushed forward, yanking the paper down, but not before neighbors across the street saw. Curtains shifted. Porch lights clicked on. Two teens paused their bicycles, watching with interest. "What is this?" she snapped, waving the document in Grant's face. "Are you just going to let her humiliate us like this? In front of everyone?" Grant read the paper silently, his shoulders sagging. He didn't answer her. I sat still in my chair, calm as stone, the broom leaning against the wall beside me like a sentinel. Kendra's fury filled the room, but no one spoke back to her. Even the children upstairs stayed quiet, listening through the ceiling vents. The house itself seemed to hold its breath as the notice flapped once against the doorframe in the evening breeze. The days after the notice appeared on the door turned the house into a stage, with Kendra shifting masks as easily as changing outfits. 1 hour, she was furious, her voice low and venomous. "If you go through with this, you'll never see Lila or Caleb again. I'll make sure of it." The next, she was weeping in the kitchen, dabbing her eyes with a dish towel, saying I was tearing apart her family, and she had no idea why I hated her so much. I learned to write it all down. Each word, each threat, each tearful performance recorded in a small leather journal I kept in my purse. Patel had told me, keep records. Judges don't weigh emotion, they weigh evidence. Still, it wasn't only for the law. It was for me. Seeing the words on paper made them smaller, less able to rattle in my chest. One night, I heard quiet footsteps in the hall. Grant tapped gently on my door, his silhouette hesitant in the frame. He looked older than his 40 years worn down by debt and divided loyalties. "Mom," he whispered, "can we fix this? Can we make it go away?" I set my book aside and motioned him in. He sat on the edge of my bed staring at the floorboards. "Fixing it doesn't mean pretending it never happened," I told him. "Fixing it means telling the truth out loud. About the money, about the house, about the way I've been treated." He covered his face with his hands. "If I do that, Kendra will say I betrayed her. She'll never forgive me." I laid a hand on his shoulder the same way I had when he was a boy, hiding after breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball. Grant silence is complicity. Every time you don't speak, you're choosing her side over mine. Over your children's too. They're watching all of this. His shoulders shook, though he didn't cry. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," I said firmly. "You just don't know it yet." We sat in silence until he rose and left without another word. I heard his steps fade down the hall, then the murmur of Kendra's voice rising in sharp tones. Another mask, another scene. The next morning at breakfast, she tried once more with syrupy kindness. "Marjorie, I'm sorry if I overreacted. Maybe we can just reset. Forget the papers, the deadlines. Start fresh." I stirred my coffee without looking up. "It doesn't work that way." Her smile cracked and the fury bled back in. "Then you're going to regret this. More than you can imagine." I wrote the words down later that afternoon, pressing my pen so hard into the page that it almost tore. Grant lingered at the doorway as I finished, his face pale. He said nothing, but his eyes told me he had heard every word. The clock was still ticking, and the house felt more fragile each day, like walls straining under too much weight. The law office smelled faintly of lemon polish and nerves. We sat in a glass-walled conference room, neutral ground by design, though the tension in the air could have cracked stone. Ms. Patel arranged her papers with quiet precision, her silver pen gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. Across the table, Kendra perched in her chair like it was a throned chin. High arms crossed. Grant sat beside her, pale and silent, his tie pulled loose as if it were strangling him. Patel opened smoothly. "We're here today to settle this without dragging it into court. The options are straightforward. Repay the note in full, vacate the property, or face foreclosure proceedings. Mrs. Ellison is entitled by law to enforce the lien." Kendra laughed sharply. "You make it sound so simple. We're talking about family here, not tenants in some boarding house." Patel's voice didn't waver. "Family doesn't negate contracts. The debt remains." She slid a folder across the table. "These are the payment terms should you wish to avoid eviction." Kendra snapped it open, skimmed the numbers, then shoved it back like it was poisoned. "We don't have that kind of money. And she knows it." Her eyes cut toward me, blazing. This is just her way of punishing me. I folded my hands on the table. "It isn't punishment. It's boundaries. But money isn't the only issue. If you want me to consider any leniency, you'll apologize. Not to me. To Lila and Caleb. For the way you've taught them to treat me." For the first time, Kendra blinked. The fight faltered a fraction, then hardened again. "I will not grovel in front of children. They're mine, and I'll raise them how I see fit." I leaned forward slightly. "Respect isn't optional even for parents. You humiliated me in front of them. You mocked me online. You've made cruelty into their lesson. That ends here. They deserve to hear you admit it was wrong." Grant stirred beside her. His hands clenched on the table finally moved. "Kendra," he said softly, "she's right." Her head whipped toward him. "Excuse me." He swallowed, hard eyes fixed on the wood grain rather than her face. "The kids, they ask questions. They don't understand why you call her names. They shouldn't have to. I can't keep telling them it's just jokes." The silence stretched taut. Kendra's chair scraped back suddenly, a screech of metal on tile. She stood, her purse already slung over her shoulder. This is absurd. I don't have to sit here and be ganged up on. If you want your perfect mother, Grant, you can move in with her. But I'm done. She stormed out, heels clicking like hammers down the hallway. The door thudded shut, leaving the room hollow. Grant stayed seated. His face was gray, but he didn't move to follow. For a moment, only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the room. Patel slid another document across. Her leaving doesn't change the deadline, but it does simplify matters. Mr. Ellison, the choice is now yours. Grant stared at the paper, then at me. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Mom, he said hoarsely, I don't know how to fix this, but I can't pretend anymore. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground shift, uncertain, but toward something that might finally resemble truth. The deadline came and went without payment. Patel filed the paperwork, and within days, the court approved the stipulated judgment. They had 10 days to move. No appeals, no more bargaining. The decision was final. The movers arrived on a gray morning, their truck backing into the driveway with a beep that echoed down the street. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some feigning surprise, others looking almost satisfied to have their suspicions confirmed. I stayed inside, watching from the living room window as boxes were carried out, evidence of lives hurriedly condensed. Grant hovered pale and hollow, directing men who barely listened. His voice cracked when they lifted the couch we had once chosen, together at a second-hand store years ago, when he and Kendra first married. It had been shabby then, but I'd reupholstered the cushions myself, sewing late into the night. Now it disappeared into the truck like any other piece of freight. Kendra refused to meet my eyes. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, barking into it. At intervals, her face set in a mask of contempt. She looked through me, not at me, as though denying me the satisfaction of acknowledgement. But every slam of a box against the doorframe betrayed her fury. The hardest part was the children. Lila pressed herself against my waist, shoulders shaking. Grandma, why does it have to be this way? Why can't we all just stay? I stroked her hair, holding her as tightly as I dared. Because sometimes, I whispered, staying means losing yourself, and I can't let you learn that lesson the wrong way. Caleb stood nearby, silent, his baseball cap pulled low. When I knelt to meet his eyes, he finally spoke. I don't want to go. I like it here. It feels safe. My throat tightened, but I forced steadiness into my reply. You'll always have a place here, no matter what. This is your home, too. The movers worked until late afternoon. By the time the last box was loaded, the house echoed with emptiness. The photos Kendra had rehung to erase mine were gone. The rugs rolled up the walls bare. Yet instead of sorrow, I felt something cleaner, like the air after a storm. Grant lingered at the doorway with his car keys dangling in his hand. His eyes met mine, red-rimmed and tired. I'll bring the kids by, he said quietly. I know I've failed you, Mom, but maybe I can still do right by them. I touched his cheek just for a moment. Do better, Grant. That's all I ask. He nodded, then turned to follow Kendra, who was already striding toward the car. The children looked back, waving through tears. I waved too, holding my smile until they disappeared down the street. When I closed the door, I saw it leaning against the frame where the movers had left it by accident. The broom. The same one Kendra had placed in my hands with a sneer. Now it was hers to carry out, yet abandoned, forgotten. I left it there, propped by the door, a symbol of what had been meant to break me, standing useless, powerless in the light of day. The house was mine again, quiet but unshaken, waiting for whatever came next. The day after they left the house felt cavernous, each room echoing with its own silence. No footsteps overhead, no slammed cupboard doors, no mocking laughter drifting down the stairs, just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the old floorboards when I moved through the hall. I stood in the living room and looked at the pale rectangles on the walls where pictures once hung. For a long while, I simply stared, remembering how Kendra had replaced my photographs with her curated frames, smiling families posed in matching outfits. Everything polished for show. Now the walls were bare again, ready to receive something honest. I went to the basement, opened an old cedar chest, and lifted out the portrait of David I had tucked away years ago. His eyes, kind even in stillness, seemed to meet mine as I carried it upstairs. With careful hands, I hung it above the mantel. The hammer's sound echoed in the emptiness, but it didn't feel jarring. It felt final, like laying a stone at the head of a grave and saying the words you'd held too long. The next few days I painted,